You know, why why is it important to know your budget? Why is it important to know your monthly payment? Why is it important to know your cash to close? I
For
think
sure.
all of that is important because when you I, I believe that buying a home is second, first, third home, it's always a little bit emotional.
Yeah,
So I believe that once you take that emotional off and you can see realistically what you're okay with, your monthly payment, your cash from closing, then you can like kind of see the numbers and see, okay, this is what I'm okay with. So I just think it's a really good topic to talk about that.
for sure. Let's jump right into it. So this is Decommission Podcast episode 2, and we're going to jump right into talking about um, what is why you should know your budget before going shopping. And I always tell my clients this because I get a client as a realtor. I get clients that'll tell me, well, let's find the house first, and if I really like it, I'll go through the hassle of trying to get financing, right? And I try to tell clients that's like going to Louis Vuitton um, without knowing what's in your wallet, right? So you're going to somewhere where the prices are it's a little higher. It's a little higher than what you're used to paying for a purse. And the difference between rent and a mortgage can be that as drastic as buying a Walmart bag versus a Louis Vuitton bag. So, for example, the last rent that I had a client that went from renting to buying. The last time they paid rent, they were paying $1,800 a month for a comfortable 3 bedroom, 2 bath home, right?
Yes.
And but then to get the same kind of even maybe a little more comfortable in great schools and no crime or whatever, which was a stark contrast to where they were living. uh, they were buying a $500,000 home, and at that time with the interest rates what they were looking at a $3,600 a month payment. So that's almost double. And a lot of that goes into it, and I know that we'll kind of unpack what goes into these payments. But yeah, so for me, it's like if you don't really know what your budget is, uh, you're just window shopping and you're wasting your own time by not knowing how much you can actually truly afford. And maybe you, with your experience, you can tell us a little bit more about expectation versus the reality that maybe people come to you and tell you, this is what I want versus what they actually ultimately end up getting.
Yeah, that's very true. In many cases, I many cases I start with my phone call. Hey Isaac, I'm looking to buy a home. And I just saw this beautiful 4 bedroom, nice pool. So in their minds, it's like, okay, they have a home already in their minds, that
Hmm.
they picked out. Now it's time to get the financing. I think that's double working because we have to go back and get you approved very quickly because you need to submit an offer ASAP,
Hmm.
even in any kind of market, even in this market. I think it's always good to put in your offer as soon as possible. I think it's always beneficial. So to to work on your approval ASAP and get you your pre-approval letter, make sure we can do the loan, make sure you're good to go, you know your monthly payment, um, and to submit your offer, that's a window of maybe 5 days right there. I mean, not, I mean, if you're really, getting your documents to your lender, reviewing everything, it can be quicker than that. But overall, just getting documents to me, getting you approved, you reviewing your offer. It's a good solid 4 or 5 days.
So
Yeah.
what do you as a lender require to provide at least a pre-approval letter? So a lot of people they'll never get it, and this is the mentality that I'm seeing clients' wheels turning, uh, because they think that they know uh, what the process is. So what is it that you as a lender ask for in order to get that pre-approval done, which is so crucial to submit an offer with? Nobody's going to consider an offer without a pre-approval letter. That's
Right,
like saying,
exactly.
trust me, I got the money in the bank.
That's
That's not
exactly
how we
right.
buy real estate, right? So that has to be backed up by something. It's usually a pre-approval letter, or if it's all cash, a proof of
Yeah.
funds. So somebody needs to see your bank statements.
Yeah.
So
So Jorge,
what do you ask for?
that's a good question. So I always explain about the 3 pillars. Something very simple because there's a lot of different types of loans. And on top of the loan program, there's a lot of different um, types of loans, and then there's loan programs like down payment assistance. So to put everything in a spectrum, there's always 3 pillars. It's always credit, your work history, and your down payment. Credit score, we have typically at least a 620. That would be very great. and a 2-year work history, whether you're self-employed or you're W-2, and just your minimum down payment.
Okay.
I think that's a great start.
So then a couple of questions about that. So first of all, the work history, when you say 2-year work history, does that have to be in the same job?
It does not have to be in the same job. It just you have to be at least working for 2 years. Or in that working can be part of school. So if you go to school, college, education, and you graduate as a excuse me, you graduate and you're a nurse, you're a police officer, you're a doctor. That the time of being in school counts as your work history. So you don't have to be at your work physically 2 years. Your education is part of your work history. And to the other spectrum, if you've been working for 2 years, but you have been going from job to job, that's okay too. I did a loan for a young guy that had 12 previous jobs,
Wow.
and he finally found what he wanted to do. And
Yeah.
once we found that, he wanted to take the chance of buying a home. So as long as you have a work history, you've been actively working, or you've been in school, that counts as your work history.
So taking school out of it, if it's a consistent 2 years of work history, does it have to be in the same field?
It depends what kind of loan, whether it's FHA or conventional, but typically it does not. The guy that I did a loan for was FHA. He had 12 jobs. It was in the food industry, the retail industry. Um, he was even in the mortgage industry for a little while, and now he's back to doing what he likes to do, which is, I believe, it was accounting. So he had plenty of experience in different fields, and we still got him approved and got him into a home.
Perfect. So then you mentioned the food industry. So I waited tables when I was younger. Um, and I had people twice my age who never owned a home. They continued to rent during that time. What can we do, or what can be done for people that take cash tips home, for example, every single day? How does that factor into trying to get them a loan? Is that something that's possible?
It is absolutely possible. It all comes down if you're a 1099 or a W-2. Many places are different. Some the business might be great, but it might be like a very um like mom and pop. So they
Mm-hmm.
probably give you a 1099 at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So everything's a little different. But if you have a W-2, we need the consistency of 2 years. So
Mm-hmm.
we can average out your overtime, we can average out your tips, we can average out your bonuses.
Mm-hmm.
That would give us a clear indication how much we can average and use as income.
So then what you're saying is that whenever someone is, for example, waiting tables, in order for you to get them approved, they have to declare as much as possible in their taxes. Is that what you're saying?
If they're W-2, I'm
If they're
sorry, if
W
they're
two, right?
1099. Yeah.
Yeah. So because what happens, what I've seen in a lot of these cash, where the employees are getting paid. So in Texas, waiters and waitresses are making 213 an hour. They're not making minimum wage.
Mhm.
So even if they consistently deposit into their bank account every week, but they're not declaring, which I've seen a lot of, they're only declaring half of what they actually make. Are you saying that they would have to get into the better habit of doing that?
You're you're saying to claim that income in their taxes, right?
Yeah, right.
If they're W-2, we don't need tax returns.
Hmm.
If they're 1099, then we would need the tax returns. So I would
Okay.
say yes. I would. If you're 1099, you need to talk to the lender.
Hmm.
I think as a 1099, you really have to have your lender communicate with your CPA very nicely. So that you can report the right income, file
Okay.
the right mileage, file the right appreciation. All that comes into play, and then we can kind of see, how much we need to file, how much we need to kind of put in the numbers so you can qualify as traditional financing.
Okay. And then so then you also said out of your the things that you're going to look at whenever you're trying to get someone qualified, they talking about, do you have the down payment available, right? So then that's one of the big questions that people, because they don't get a clear answer, they never actually jump into maybe buying a home.
Mhm.
So what do you need? How much do you need to see? Is there a number that you would like to see? And I know that it's dependent upon the value of the property and all of these things, but
I mean, there's
how
always
would you answer that question? Hey, how much, somebody that's just off the street, how much should I have as a down payment?
as beginning your
Hmm.
journey of becoming a home buyer, I would say have 5% of the purchase price
Hmm.
and about 3 months of reserve.
Yeah.
3 months of it. the 3 months of reserve is not required, but it's always better to, buy a home and then have excess money in the bank. That's called reserve. And the reason for that, because maybe you can touch a little bit on this, because I believe there's expenses outside of closing, like your moving
Oh yeah.
expenses,
Yeah.
like your first get together at your party, getting furniture, all that costs money. And
Yep.
you never know if you can get sick throughout that, or anything could happen. Life happens to everybody, you know?
Yep.
So I would say get 5% of the purchase price and then just 3 months of reserve.
Yeah. So I would say that makes sense because you never know, right? You move into the house and you could be partying, trying to celebrate, or did something happen during the move? You never know. You never know. So I would say to give it a concrete number. So the average sales price for the entire Houston area, right? That includes Katy, that includes Cypress, that includes
Mhm.
Houston, all the suburbs, everything. It's about 345, right? And that's with 345, depending on what area you buy in, you could get a very, very, very decent house, like a really good size, that with great amenities and security and safety. But most of the last few transactions that we've done have been under 280, which you're still getting a really, really comfortable house. So worst case scenario, let's say you're hitting the average. So about 5% of 345 is $17,000, right? Plus, uh, what is on 345 your monthly payment, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about what monthly payment looks like. Your monthly payment, do you know what that would look like? Assuming maybe like an average tax of 3%.
Maybe around maybe 29, 28, about 28 to 2,900.
Okay, so call it 3,000 a month. At worst case scenario, right? And that's with a pretty high tax of 3%, 3.2%.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's right now with whatever the interest rate is today.
Yeah, my section and a half, about that,
Yeah.
pretty common these things.
And that's 345, and we mentioned that just because, like Isaac mentioned, having those reserves, right? So having another nine or $10,000 in the bank. So maybe overall you can jump into the market with 27, $30,000, which I think is a pretty safe number for any unexpecteds, right? So
Mhm.
whenever we go out and buy a home, or we're looking for homes with clients, here's the number one expectation whenever we're shopping, right? Um, you're not going to find the perfect home. And I think you alluded to this in the beginning. Typically, that first home is not the forever home. It's usually not. I have clients that literally bought a new construction home last year, and next year we already know we're going to sell it because I'm already seeing where the market's headed in their area, and they're going to upgrade from a one-story, three-bedroom, two-bath, and likely, we'll see what the market does, move into a four-bedroom, two-story. That's going to cost somewhere around 300,000 because we negotiated them a good deal with the builder. They got great, bless you. They got great terms. They're able to save, and they're putting a lot towards their equity. So they're going to either be able to rent it out or sell it and come out really well. So house number one is usually not the forever home. First of all, secondly, you're not going to find all your must-haves in that first home, and that shouldn't discourage you because, like I tell people all the time, it's the biggest winners in real estate is not the realtor, it's not the lender, it's not even the people that the lender is whose money they're lending. It's the banks. It's the people that are. It's not even the banks. It's whoever's giving out the money for everyone to lend, to use, to borrow, to circulate through the economy, because that money's coming back plus an extra 2%, 3% interest, right? Because even when you're lending money, you still have to pay a certain amount to lend it out. So you're usually just making the difference in those interest rates. So the ultimate winner is not you or me or the consumer. It's the bank. So I would say always play the game rather than just throwing the money away on rent. And the first thing to know is exactly how much house you can qualify for, because even if, and we can get into monthly payment, 100% of that payment is not going to come back to you as equity, right? So we have principal, we have interest, we have taxes, we have insurance, and it's homeowners insurance. We have mortgage insurance, uh, and we can talk a little bit about maybe on that same, like maybe a $345,000 purchase, $3,000 a month, what would go towards the principal? How much am I actually paying down into the home? Is that something you'd have an idea of?
I can.
Yeah.
So roughly, I mean, just paying an interest
Hmm.
on a 345 home is roughly about 1851 a month, just on interest. So in principle, it's going to be very little. Like the first couple of years of owning, it's mostly interest.
Hmm.
So it'll be interest of 1851 a month, and principal of about $300,
Right.
and that will give you a combined monthly payment of roughly of principal and interest of $2,200,
Hmm.
just principal and interest, not including taxes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And then, so then let's say, for example, that same $345,000 home, which is something that people are not super privy to, is the county, at least for us, the county is assessing the value of the home for tax purposes. And they're doing this every single year. So they're going to take the tax rate for your community or the section of your community. And
mhm.
you gotta, it gets really specific. The tax rate is represented as a percentage, right? So it's going to be a percentage of the assessed value that the county gives us. Usually it's less than the purchase price. It has, and that's a distinction I want to make. It's going to be different from the purchase price, which is, it's super important to know, how much you're qualified for, because you got to take all these little payments into the equation. But anyways, let's say on a $345,000 home, you could potentially be paying $315,000 in taxes. It just in assessed value. So for simple numbers, at 3%, that's $9,000 a year, which $9,000 a year divided by 12 is $750. So you're paying $750 additional on top of that $2,200 that you're describing, plus another $100 in uh, homeowners insurance. And I don't know if you have mortgage insurance, how much more are we talking about?
Maybe like an extra 175.
An extra 175. So
Yeah.
175 plus 2,200 plus 750, you're talking about 3,125 on a $345,000 purchase for the first couple of years. A lot of that money is not going to go towards paying down uh, the total amount. So that's why it's so important not just to know how much you can afford, but what your plan for the property is. If you don't know how long you're going to be in the property, and regardless of what the market is doing, right? Because these are things that are always shifting. If you're getting into the market, if you're jumping into it and you're not planning on being there more than a year or two, you're likely going to lose money unless you get lucky and it's an up market whenever you're going to sell, right? But it's you have to know how much you can qualify for, and we have Isaac here who works with a specific lender, but most of these guidelines are pretty even throughout the lending community, unless they're offering, maybe tell me if I'm wrong, but unless they're offering something outside of what your conventional products are, uh, pretty much all guidelines are the same. Am I wrong?
Most of your value, like most of like the low down payments, lower interest rates would be in loans that follow Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines, and those are nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
There's some if there's a problem where you've been working less than 2 years, or maybe you're self-employed, we can still get you in a home, but not with these traditional guidelines. It's outside of those guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
And that will require typically more down payment, a little higher interest rate, but everything's possible. We just need the consistency. If you're self-employed, if you're looking at this, you're self-employed. If you've been consistently increasing for at least a year, we can get you inside a home. It may require some other additional steps, like a stronger down payment, a little higher interest rate, but it's possible. But where you see the most of the value is following your Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines.
So the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac guidelines are an interesting one, and maybe we should tell people a little bit more about them. I'm not going to ask you to recite them, but maybe telling people that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are essentially, they're not really government entities. They're more like private institutions that are setting these guidelines because they are going to. Why do we follow their guidelines?
We follow the guidelines because it's what that's a good question, really. We follow the guidelines because if people who have been people who have been homeowners, if you notice that your loan has been sold a couple times, transferred is to be sold. So we follow these guidelines because they're a little more stricter than what they used to be. Because of 2008,
Hmm.
we were giving out a lot of bad loans at the time. People were not who should not been qualified were getting qualified.
Right.
So because of that, we now have guidelines what to follow, which is government, which is FHA, VA, conventional, USDA. All of those have guidelines we have to follow because if we meet the guidelines, then we meet the selling guidelines to be sold and transferred to other banks.
So essentially, what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac does is we'll set the guidelines, and we'll help. This will help us then transfer or sell that loan to another bank or to another
Yeah.
institution, because
Plus, yes.
go ahead.
Plus they see you as a well qualified candidate. Like you're solid. Um, and that can be as little as 580 credit score, a little money in the bank. I mean, some guidelines are really there to help home buyers. But you're essentially, if you get approved with traditional financing, you're a well qualified borrower.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to point out to people is that you're these are not just arbitrary guidelines. It's not Isaac being mean if you don't get qualified. It's that they have to follow these things because these loans are not going to be kept in Supreme Lending's books. They're not going to be kept by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They're going to be sold into a secondary market, and that secondary market only wants good loans. Now, there's a secondary market for bad loans, and we can talk about that some other time, where you can just create your own loans and create your own notes and sell those. But that's a whole different ballgame. We're not even going to touch that. But that's why these guidelines are there for lending, is because there is a business of selling the notes, so selling the loans off to somebody else. So again, it's not Supreme Lending being mean. It's not going to another company and maybe they have something better. Maybe they do, but they're going to be outside and they might be a little more expensive. You might end up paying a little more upfront as a down payment and likely a higher interest rate. We we did a good job of explaining why it's so important to go out there already knowing what you're qualified for. So if unless you're going to buy, let's say, a $250,000 home all cash, or you're going to buy directly from a seller and making payments to them, it pays to have a conversation with someone like Isaac to see where you stand. When it comes to working with a realtor, you can find the nicest realtor on the planet, and I kind of tend to think that I'm one of the nicest, and I'll take you to 20 houses. But at some point, you're gonna have to get pre-qualified because then we're just window shopping. And look, I honestly I don't get a salary, and none of us get a salary, right? So we are in it to make it happen for you, but there are steps to this thing. So getting you pre-qualified is the most important thing before shopping, because it's not just, oh, I didn't qualify. And this is one of the things that leads me to work with Isaac so closely. A lot of lenders will tell you yes or no, and no, sorry, we can't do it. But then, okay, well, then give me a path to getting there,
Mhm.
right? Give me a path to, I need to, okay, what can I work on? And typically, and this is the other thing that I wanted to get into. So there's typically two other third party companies or types of companies that we work with. So it'll either be like a credit repair, credit restoration type of deal, or folks will work with like a combination of that, and then maybe like somebody that's sending like fighting some of the things on your credit report. So you have like your LinkedIn law firms and things like that. Look, I'm not here to advocate for one or the other. It doesn't matter. The point is, I know that I have people that I work with. I know that Isaac has people that he works with. But that's one of the steps is working, either doing it yourself or working with someone. Who do you usually recommend for credit repair and things like that?
I have a very lovely lady. Her name is Cecilia, and she was actually a credit attorney
Okay.
for the longest time, and now she's been running her own shop, really helping. So it's her own company, and I think that's great because you take responsibility, you take
What's the name of the
accountability.
company?
Here, it's something very catchy
Is it
that I don't.
CDC?
Let me pull her up. Something very catchy. What was it? Rise Again Credit Repair.
Okay, Rise Again Credit Repair, and then we'll put her information somewhere on the screen for people to have it.
She's always proactive. She gives state, and she is very affordable too. So it's not like she's going to take an arm and a leg and keep you in this program for years and years. Like I've heard people who've been in credit repair for longer than they should have been.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's a crazy thing that I've heard
and,
too.
and if
It
you
shouldn't be
if
that
you
long.
spend more than 8 months, call us because that shouldn't be right.
Right.
Especially if you've been in a program and they're not giving you follow ups, not telling you, hey Isaac or Mr. Isaac, we took this off of your credit repair, and next month we can expect this increase. If they're not doing that month by month, there's no reason why not to continue that program. It's a lot of I think people have high expectations, which is true. I mean, you should have, but you got to find the right people. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, maybe we can call her in next week, see if that's something that we can do,
let's do it.
and
Let's
ask her
do it.
some credit questions. And then the last thing about that is, my understanding is, in order for that to be legitimate, it has to be somebody that's has some sort of special certification in the state of Texas, right? So whenever you're calling 800 numbers and your friend recommended somebody, you have to vet them, right? And then hopefully next week we can get her to answer some more of those questions. Was there anything else that you wanted to touch on, getting pre-approved or knowing what your budget is and what's so important about that before we
Um,
signed off?
no, I think that's it. I mean, maybe if you want to talk about, I mean, not to scare them, but I think you should elaborate on the outside cost of closing.
Mm,
Based on your experience, you see like people, like obviously you have to have moving expenses, whether a family member's helping you or not, that's still gas,
yeah,
food, and making sure that they're taken care of.
yeah.
And then your
So
housewarming parties, and stuff like that. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but
yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
it's important because people think, okay, I bought a home, my first payment's not due in 60 days.
Mhm.
I don't have to spend any money.
Right.
I don't know about that. I don't know if
Yeah,
that's true.
so that's really important. So there's two things to that. It really depends, number one, on who you're buying from, right? So if you're buying from someone that's leaving all their furniture, all the fixtures, they're giving you, if it's a builder, you've got all the appliances in there, then you don't have to worry so much about that. You really, a lot of times, you just have to bring in uh, either your old or brand new uh, bedroom furniture. That's all I really consider. Uh, but if you're not getting any of that in the deal, which even with older homes, a lot of times some people just want to leave all their stuff behind. There's a couple of things about that. Maybe that stuff doesn't work, and their seller's selling you a home. They're not selling you the appliances. If they leave it behind and you decide to use it, they're not. That's not something that they can guarantee that it's working properly, and that's number one. Number two would be outside of the obvious furnishing a living room, furnishing the bedrooms, appliances, and things like that. You have to start thinking about utilities and startup costs of utilities. So if this is something that's new to you and you've only been paying rent in an apartment, I'll give you, for example, you can shop the rate, and this is something a lot of people don't know in Texas. You can shop the rate for your electricity bill, for example. For gas, we only have the one company, but for electricity bills, you can go to powertochoose.org and you'll see the rates for most of the major electricity companies. I mean, ultimately, it's all the same electricity, just different providers. Or you can go to powerwizard.com. So there's these companies that are popping up that if you give them a monthly fee, $8, they'll switch you to the best rate every month unless you're locked into a contract.
Oh, that's really
Yeah, so I have that. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes you have to pay a cancellation the next rate, and the math doesn't math. But yeah, so you have to consider gas if your place has gas, and a lot of places do. And gas is going to be used not just for cooking, but for heating as well. It could be used for heating, or if it's all electrical, then you electricity. But then you have to budget for electricity every single month. Depending on the size of the home, let's say 1,300 square feet to up to 2,000 square feet, you might be looking at anywhere between maybe $100 on the low end to up to $200 on the very high end. I've had some higher ones, but that was during a really harsh winter. But other than that, I've never been in a home that's been bigger than 2,000 square feet. We're probably gonna have to change that next year. But from what my clients are telling me, 2,000, let's say 2,300 to up to 3,000 square feet, you're talking about maybe high hundreds, low to mid 200s But again, you have to shop the rate for the electricity.
Mhm.
And there's always deposits up front and things like that. Water, same thing. We have municipal utility districts all set up throughout the area, throughout the county, and that's that each one is going to charge you something up front, and then they're going to charge you monthly. On top of that, just FYI, you're also paying. Your taxes are also going towards that. So you're paying a bill for the service, but you're also paying in taxes to have the service. Um, and so electricity, water, and gas, definitely consider that. Consider landscaping. Landscaping is your own. HOA fees do not cover landscaping in most cases. Landscaping can run you anywhere from $20 to $60 depending on what size yard or and what's all involved in that. Um, let's see. Oh, and HOA dues as well. Those are going to go into that. So a lot of times, whenever you first buy a home, there could be HOA's dues that are due. Like for example, right now we have somebody closing. Well, that closed last week. They're going to have to pay in January. They're going to have to pay the HOA dues for the year. So those
Mhm.
could be anywhere between 400 and the highest I've seen is maybe $1,800 a year. And sometimes you can put that in escrow. You can put that into your monthly payments. But sometimes you can just pay the whole thing up front. And those HOA dues, they usually cover common areas, right? So don't expect it to have anything to do with your home unless you're buying a condo or buying a townhome in a townhome complex. Yeah, I would say that's pretty much it. I would think the only other outside expense, and this is something that I gift all my clients, is a home warranty. Whenever you buy a home warranty,
Good.
it's $500 a year, 400 to 600, depending on the package that you get. I usually gift it to my clients because it's going to cover appliances, it's going to cover electrical, plumbing, um, it's going to cover a few other systems inside the home that a regular homeowner's insurance does not. And maybe we can get a homeowner's insurance person to join us at one point or another to describe that. But a homeowner's
Good.
insurance is not going to cover any of those things. So yeah, those would be. I would say it's pretty. I would say having an additional, 3 months in reserve, like you mentioned, would help a lot. You're going to run into a lot of these upfront costs just to get it started, and then your monthlies are going to change a little bit. But that's probably the best way to get the ball rolling.
Yeah. And once again, like, we're not trying to scare people of like all these little fees outside of closing, but it's just being realistic. I mean,
Yeah,
there's more. If owning a home was easy, everybody would do it.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
so it just takes a little more effort, and you have to now start to open up your mail. Some people just you gotta
yes,
open up your mail and read all your letters.
yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
And then
so once again, it's not like we're trying to scare
yeah,
you. Sleep at night, knowing that you have 3 months reserve
yep.
for your moving expenses and everything you need until you get your first payment in about 60 days.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy, and maybe in the near future we can get somebody in here to, or we can put together something to show people what's the best way to save that money. You might not be anywhere near that, right? $30,000 seems like a lot,